Hello everyone, my name is Swanee. Thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel. Now, Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2 has officially launched for everyone as of today on September the 9th, so I figured I'd go over some beginner tips and tricks that helped me out during my playthrough. Now, I've been playing the game daily for over 2 weeks now since I was able to get an early review code, so I have multiple max level 25 characters, and I have over 100 hours of in-game playtime. And this game isn't exactly easy on new players. It can be pretty difficult and even frustrating at times, even at easy difficulties if you don't know what you're doing. So hopefully today's video will help you guys out, and if it does, then consider hitting the thumbs up button. It's completely free, and it's a great way to help support my channel and push it to new people in the algorithm. So with that said, let's just go ahead and jump right into the tips. So in Space Marine 2, there are 3 game modes that you can play. There's the main story campaign, the operations mode, and PvP. And a lot of my tips are going to revolve around the operations mode, since this is probably the mode that most of you are going to be replaying over and over, and this is where a lot of your character builds and customization comes into play. So the first tip I have when in operations mode is to dodge. A lot. And I couldn't tell you how many times dodging has saved my life. I know it might sound pretty obvious to dodge out of the way of certain attacks, but in some missions, spam dodging literally saved the entire mission for me and my team. This game is brutal when it comes to getting XP, especially when you get to those harder difficulties. You can go an entire match just for your squad to die at the very end, and then you lose out on all your currency and a large chunk of XP that you would have got. And nobody wants to waste 30 minutes on a mission just to die at the very end. So spam dodging might be your only option in certain situations. Now, I personally like to chalk this up to poor game design, but they just don't give you nearly enough ammo on those harder difficulties. I've played countless missions where by the very end of the level, my whole team will either be out of ammo or 2 of the squad mates are dead, and then it's up to you versus the massive horde of enemies. And most of the time, there's way more enemies than you have ammo, and since you constantly have very little health in this game, if you stop to grab more ammo at the ammo box, you're risking losing the entire match for everyone. So I found that spamming the dodge button over and over and over again will just slightly keep you out of reach of most enemies. Now, you'll still have to worry about ranged attacks, but as long as you stay on the move, you can spam dodge long enough for your team to respawn. And like I've said, this has saved me a bunch of different times in the late game content. So if it comes down to you and you're the last teammate surviving and you're completely swarmed by enemies and you don't have any ammo, just dodge, dodge, dodge long enough for your teammates to respawn. So the next tip is one that the game doesn't really tell you about, and it's if you're in a mission and you hit the pause menu, it will show you the full in-game moveset of each of your character classes. So if you're playing as the sniper or the bulwark or the assault class, just hit the pause menu and it will show all the different moves that you can pull off. Normally all the moves are pretty simple and they're pretty easy to remember. It's normally just attack button, and then some variation of holding down the attack button. And this is how you can pull off different really strong attacks. So if you're trying to break an enemy's guard stance, you can do that pretty easily by holding down the attack button. And if you want to pull off some mean fast combos against smaller enemies, you can do that as well. Every class is different with their abilities, so make sure you hit the pause menu. I personally took a screenshot of the pause menu for each of the classes and I put it up on my second monitor. That way, when I'm in the middle of combat, I can just quickly glance at my second monitor and I don't have to worry about pausing in the middle of combat and getting myself killed. So the next tip is a simple one, but it's actually very important, and it's to make sure you take full advantage of your ping ability. Now, I play with an Xbox controller, so for me, it's up on the D-pad, but teamwork is super important in this game, and some enemies need to be taken out ASAP, such as any enemy that's calling for reinforcements. And when an enemy is calling for reinforcements, they'll have this little skull appear above their head, and when that skull fully fills up, then, they'll call for backup. And if you don't kill them as soon as possible, you can very quickly get overwhelmed and lose the match. So pinging these enemies can help your teammates see them just a little bit better and will help you take them out even faster. Same goes for strong enemies such as the lictors that can go invisible or the raveners that can go underground. This is especially useful for those missions that take place in the dark or the final operation mission where dust storms blow in and it's really hard to see. Enemies can be very bullet spongy in this game, so pinging a strong enemy so that everyone can focus on it all at once is key to survival in some of the late game content. Pinging is also a great way to point out loot for your team as well, so anytime you see an ammo crate or a loadout station, extra stems, or maybe some extra grenades, make sure to ping them so that your team can refill on supplies. There's no need to hoard all the stems and grenades, because if your teammates don't have any stems, then odds are they're probably going to die off, and it's going to be you versus all of the enemies, and you're probably not going to survive. So don't be greedy and ping extra loot for your team. Speaking of enemies that you should prioritize during your missions, when facing the Tyranids, you want to time your kills against the medium tier enemies. The Tyranids work in a hive mind, and they like to overwhelm you with their sheer amount of numbers. And the smaller enemies aren't that difficult to deal with, but when you're dealing with 20 of them all at once, they can be pretty deadly. So if you take out the big guys first, it will either instantly kill or stun all of the smaller enemies in the vicinity. So what I like to do is kind of run around and gather up all the small guys into one big pile, and then while the group of enemies is following me, I'll go and execute one of the bigger guys, and while you're in the execution animation, all the small enemies will kind of gather around you while you're executing, and then once the big guy dies, all the small enemies will instantly be affected and will either die or get stunned. This is extremely useful during those phases where they're calling in hordes, or if an enemy calls for backup and there's a huge wave of reinforcements coming, you want to try to gather all of them up together and then execute the big guys so that they all go down at once. Another enemy you want to take out as soon as you see them are the Zoranthroupes. Now, these enemies are awful. They're super spongy, they take a lot of hits to die, and worst of all, they can buff all the other enemies around them. So if you ever notice these little green looking strings that are connected to all the enemies, it's because there's a Zoanthrope nearby and it's buffing them and making them even stronger. Now, enemies affected by this buff will have glowing red eyes, and when this happens, it will make them even more deadly. Sometimes you'll get just one Zoanthrope by themselves, and sometimes, unfortunately, two of them can spawn in at the same time, and when this happens, they're going to pass a shield back and forth to each other. So if this happens, you want to stop what you're doing and ping whichever one doesn't have the shield, so you and your teammates can focus on the one that doesn't have the shield and take them out quickly. If you don't take this enemy out quickly, then they're going to just buff the crap out of everything, and you're going to be in for a very rough time. So trust me, take out the Zoanthropes as soon as you see them. The next tip has to do with these loadout stations. Now, during the operation missions, you'll find a couple of these loadout stations scattered at different checkpoints, and at the loadout station, you can change between any of your 3 saved loadouts. But even if you don't want to change your loadout, still make sure you access the loadout station and then select the same loadout that you have active, because if you do this, it will refill all your ammo. So anytime you see these loadout stations, make sure you go in and grab yourself some additional ammunition. And since we're on the topic of ammunition and the lack thereof in this game, it can be pretty difficult to find ammo and supplies in some of these missions, especially on the hardest difficulty. They give you just way less ammo. You're not going to find as many ammo crates, but what you can do is keep an eye out for these little wooden crates that you're going to find throughout the map. It's actually embarrassing how far I made it before I realized you could smash open these crates. I think I got my first level 25 character before I even realized that you could smash these open. So anytime you see these wooden crates, just roll over top of them and you'll break them open, and you'll normally find some additional stems or grenades or an extra crate of ammo. And when you're playing on the hardest difficulty, every little bit of extra ammo and extra stem is going to go a long way. So make sure you're breaking open every single one of these crates. So the next tip I have is pretty simple, and it's to make sure you go and explore every single map. You don't want to go and just speed run through every single mission, because every single time you load up a new operation, it's going to randomly spawn in different pickup items just scattered throughout the map. This will include Armoury Data, which is in the form of like the little floating skull, Guardian Relics that you can use to self-revive in case you go down, and Gene Seeds that you can pick up, and if you carry them clear to the end of the mission, you will get a pretty significant XP bonus. All of these are going to be super important for each of your missions, and you're going to want to find them pretty much every single time. So what I highly recommend is that when you do find these, take a mental note of where you found it, because odds are it's going to spawn there again in the future. When I like to XP farm and level up my characters, I like to play on the very first operation mission just over and over and over again, and because of that, I pretty much have every single location for these relics memorized. I know where most of the Guardian Relics are going to spawn, I know where the Armoury Data is going to spawn, so keep a mental note of where these spawn so that you can find them every single time. And speaking of Armoury Data, you can find a maximum of 2 Armoury Datas in each mission. You can find the one random skull that will spawn just randomly on each of the maps, and then sometimes, if you're lucky, you will get a mini-boss to spawn, which is at complete random. Some missions you won't find them at all, but if you do come across a randomly generated mini-boss, you want to take them out, because if you kill them, you can get yourself a second piece of Armoury Data. Now, this Armoury Data is very crucial for upgrading your weapons, and at some point you're going to reach a bit of a bottleneck where you can't level up your weapons anymore unless you find this Armoury Data. So in every single one of your operation missions, your goal should be to 1, find the skull, and 2, if there's a mini boss, you want to kill it. That way you can get a maximum of 2 Armoury Datas to help level up your weapons. And next up, let's talk about Guardian Relics, because as you're exploring looking for the skulls, you're probably going to find a couple Guardian Relics along the way. Now, the Guardian Relics are used to self-revive, so if you go down in combat, you don't have to worry about your teammates picking you up, you can just revive yourself. Now, for this tip, I actually recommend that you wait to use your Guardian Relic. Guardian Relics can come in pretty clutch, especially on those hard difficulties. You want to stretch it as far as you can, because some of the end missions are pretty intense, and you don't want to make it clear to the end just to die. So if you have a Guardian Relic and you go down, switch to different players, get an idea of just how many enemies there are, and if they're able to get to you. If they can get to you, let them revive you. Don't just jump the gun and revive yourself immediately. You want to save those Guardian Relics until you absolutely have to use them. So the next tip is for those of you that want to level up multiple classes. And I recommend that your starting class is a class that has a shared weapon with another class. So for example, I know that the Assault class can have the Chainsaw Sword, and the Bulwark class can also have the Chainsaw Sword. So if you level up your Bulwark class, clear up to level 25, and you fully upgrade your Chainsaw Sword, well, if you want to switch over to the Assault class, you're still going to be starting off at level 1, but you're going to have yourself a fully upgraded weapon, which is going to give you a bit of advantage. So, yeah, technically you're starting off as a level 1 character, but you can probably start on like the next difficulty level up instead of starting off on the base difficulty. And if you're able to play on higher level difficulties with a low character, you're going to level up like 3 or 4 times after completing one mission. One of the reasons I was able to level up a couple of my classes so quickly is because I took a lot of those high level weapons that were on my level 25 character, used them on my level 1 character, and I was able to complete a ruthless level difficulty with my level 1 character, which is pretty nuts. And after completing a mission on the hardest difficulty with a level 1 character, I went from level 1 to like level 4 pretty much instantly, which is pretty great. So when you're trying to level up multiple classes, you want to pick classes that share weapons together. So the next tip on the list has to do with being mortally wounded. Now, when you're mortally wounded, if you get downed after being mortally wounded, then you just straight up die, and you have to sit through a respawn timer. When you're playing on the easier difficulties, you can be down twice before you fully die, and then if you're playing on the harder difficulties, you can only be down once before you're mortally wounded, and then you die on the second time you go down. And for this tip, if you didn't know, if you look up in the top left, if you're mortally wounded, then you're going to have a skull symbol right beside your health bar. And while you're mortally wounded, if you find enough stems scattered throughout the environment and you fully heal up your health bar, you can actually get rid of the mortally wounded effect and essentially get yourself a second life. So if you're mortally wounded, definitely keep an eye out for stems, because you want to get rid of that mortally wounded as soon as possible. So next up, I just wanted to remind you guys that you can check on your team inventory by holding in the select button. And if you do this, this will let you see what your teammates are carrying, so if they're carrying a Guardian Relic or if they're carrying stems on them, and this will give you a better idea of if you can pick up an item or not. So when I'm playing online and I see like some stems on the ground, I'll quickly check to see if my teammates have any stems. I'll take a glance at their health bar and I'll be like, okay, I'm low on health, but my teammate's even lower on health. He needs this more than me. Or if I see a Guardian Relic but I already have one, I see my teammates don't have one, I'll ping it and then they can pick it up. And then while you're also in the select menu, if you go over to the second tab, it will show any active abilities that your teammates have. So this is super useful when you're playing online, because everyone plays differently, everyone likes to use different perks, and you can use this to your advantage. So if you see a teammate has a perk equipped where all teammates do extra headshot damage, well, then you know you should probably focus on getting headshots. Or if they have a perk active where you do extra melee damage, well, then maybe you should focus on doing, more melee damage. So the tip is to basically just just keep an eye on this menu. This is going to give you a ton of information, especially if you're not vocal and you're not using like the in-game chat or whatever. This is just there so you have an additional resource to help you kind of manage everyone's loot within the team. And then the final tip I have for today's video is to go and complete each of the class trials for every single class. Especially if you're a new player and you're just starting off, the very first thing you should do before you get into operations is to go in single player mode and go and complete all 3 trials for every class. Because if you do this, this is going to give you a pretty good starting off point. This is going to give you a couple of green armory data so that you can upgrade a couple of your weapons early on. And this is going to give you some of that requisition currency that you can use to buy cosmetics or level ups or weapon upgrades or, you know, whatever. And it's pretty difficult to get that currency. You can earn it by completing matches in PvP or completing missions in operations. But unfortunately, you have to complete the entire mission if you want to get this currency. And this currency is used for everything. So I've had instances where I failed like 6 missions in a row because matchmaking can be pretty rough sometimes. Sometimes you just get paired with some bad teammates and, you know, you're going to fail some missions. So it is a little difficult to get that currency. So if you go through and you complete all the trials with every single class, it's going to, 1, teach you how each class plays and give you an idea of which one you kind of want to start off with. And then 2, it's going to give you a lot of currency and armory data so that you can get a little bit of a running start going straight into operations. So they don't really tell you to do the trials, and if you don't hover your cursor over it, you could very easily miss this. So I just wanted to point that out. Make sure you go through and do all 3 trials on each of the classes. So that is going to do it for all the tips and tricks in today's video. If you guys enjoyed this video, then consider giving it a thumbs up. It's greatly appreciated and it helps me out in the algorithm. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. That way you don't miss out on any future videos. And that is going to do it for me, guys. And I will talk to you all in the next video.